Joining us now on the Deseret First Credit Union hotline to give us more of a reality check is ESPN college football insider, expert, and analyst Trevor Matich, a national champion at the collegiate football level. Trevor, we didn't think that BYU could reach a new low point this season, but those were the words of Kalani Sitake. What did you think of BYU's 16-10 loss to UMass on Saturday?
Well, it was a new low point, certainly on offense. The defense actually did a really good job considering. They had a couple of low moments, but overall they hung in there and did enough to win. But the offense was just astonishing. I mean, astonishingly bad. 4 turnovers, 7 sacks, and it seemed just about impossible to make a positive gain. It was just really difficult to watch.
Well, Joe Critchlow's no Nathan Peterman. We know that. He only had 4 interceptions instead of 5. But we thought that Joe Critchlow had kind of emerged as potentially a guy. Ends up that was one game. What did you think of the performance from the freshman?
Well, I think the game against UNLV, he did pretty well. In this game, the problem is that when defenses have a tape on you, they can see what bothers you. And when you come into the season as a guy that just stepped off the plane from a mission, who was really not expected to play at all, and all of a sudden now you're the starter, there are going to be things that bother you. And what UMass saw and what they did was just attack the line of scrimmage with reckless abandon. I mean, ridiculous, reckless abandon. That gummed up the run, but more than that, it collapsed the pocket and created pressure on Critchlow. Now, when you do that on defense, you're taking a huge risk. Because when you blitz that heavily that often, if the quarterback recognizes where the blitz is coming from and understands the protection so he knows whether or not it's picked up, and if it's not, where the pressure will be coming from, then he can attack downfield in the depleted secondary and torch you, just torch you. And there are quarterbacks that are so good at that in this league. You want to blitz them because you don't want to give them time to throw, or in college football. But if you do blitz them, you know it'll be worse because they've got receivers that can beat man coverage and a quarterback that'll put the ball where it needs to go before any unblocked blitzers can get to him. The problem with Critchlow, and it's not his fault, he just stepped off a mission. He just hasn't had the reps or the time to learn it. But the problem was he didn't know where to go with the ball. And truthfully, you could say that well, they needed to block better. Well, maybe. But still, when you blitz like that, guys can be completely unblocked. And the quarterback should know where to go with the ball right now, get it out, hot. And Critchlow just didn't know. And that made everything snowball.
Trevor Matich of ESPN with us on BYU Sports Nation. It's interesting. Every fan, every critic has a voice. And on Saturday, I kept reading on social media or hearing, BYU needs to run the ball more. Do you think BYU should run the ball more? Why or why not?
Not necessarily. People they second guess play callers with this. Well, you run the ball 30 times a game and you win. So, well, what does that mean? You hand the ball off the first 30 plays and you're guaranteed to win no matter what happens? The problem is that if the run game isn't working, then it puts you behind the chains to keep on pounding it. Now, you need to invest in it. You need to commit to it because typically the run game will work better later in the game than early in the game. But there comes a point when a play caller gets tired of calling plays for 2nd and 9. Or when you throw a short pass on first down, it's 2nd and 6, and then you get dropped for a 2-yard loss and on a run, and now it's 3rd and 8. You get pretty tired of that after a while. It's hard to commit to it. Plus, when you consider that BYU, with no disrespect to Squally Canada or KJ Hall, BYU, from a standpoint of health and then personnel style, just hasn't been dynamic at the running back position. If they don't have big holes, they're not getting much done. And a lot of that is Hall being injured for a lot of the year. I think he would have had a much bigger role had it not been for that. Canada's been injured. Tolutau has been injured. So running the ball is a nice concept, but when the defense doesn't fear the pass over the top, then they'll bring safeties up. They'll gum up the line with extra players. They'll run all kinds of run stunts and run blitzes. And then they'll run pass stunts and pass blitzes and play the run on the way to the quarterback because they don't worry about you taking advantage of weakness in the secondary to invest in stopping the run. So BYU, it's a perfect storm that doesn't start with the inability to run well. It really starts with the inability to throw the ball against a secondary that's in man coverage.
What's the bigger issue on offense right now, scheme or personnel?
Oh, it's not scheme. I look at the scheme and I see this should be working. It's personnel and it's injuries. Now, when I say personnel, I don't necessarily mean they're not good enough. Having as many guys injured on offense as BYU has had really depletes their ability because they don't have, like Alabama, I mean, they're not stacked deep with parade All-Americans at all their skill positions, right, and on the offensive line. So when they lose a guy, then they lose another guy, then they lose another guy, like they've done at quarterback and running back. It really matters for this team. The second thing is that this offense requires that you actually process information, not just the quarterback, but everybody else. A typical college offense, you make one read and go. You look at the outside linebacker, for example. If he goes left, you go right. And if he goes right, you go left. Piece of cake, off you go. Well, that's easy to learn, easy to execute, but it's limited in its upside potential. This offense has got a high and upside potential as any scheme you could put in college football. But it takes time to learn it, and this is their first year of actually doing it this way. That's a problem. And then when you don't have a quarterback that is healthy enough to get in there and stay in there to kind of build a little bit of momentum from a standpoint of processing information, you keep putting new guys in at quarterback, that hurts. And then at receiver, guys, we've talked about this in the past. The receivers, bless their hearts, there have been some guys that have done really well. You know, especially freshman tight end Matt Bushman. But overall, as a group, they just don't fight for the ball as consistently as I want them to fight for the ball. And the truth of it is, next year, and they're well coached, by the way. You know, they're well coached at that position. They're just not getting it done. I think they need to recruit for receiver for two things. Number one, for speed, and number two, three things. Speed, size, as best they can. They're more likely to get size than they are speed. And then toughness. And I think next year for spring ball, instead of putting the receivers out there to run routes to see who can be the new receiver, I think they should take three guys at a time, give them baseball bats, lock them in a closet. A little while later, one of them will come out, send him to the locker room to get suited up. Then put three more receivers in a closet with baseball bats. One will come out. Send that guy out to the practice field to play a little football. They need that kind of fighter's mentality at that position because that also makes it very difficult for the quarterback to get anything else going when he's struggling. So it's a combination of a lot of things, and nobody on that offense is picking it up for anybody else who happens to be struggling at the moment.
If Mike Leach is uninvolved, we probably don't want to lock anyone in a closet, right?
Yeah, that's alleged. That was alleged, and you can go to the back of his book and look at the depositions, and you'll find that maybe what's known out there about that is not quite what actually happened.
ESPN's Trevor Matich with us. My question now is...
By the way, I was being figurative with that.
Yes.
Somebody will say, we shouldn't be beating people over the head in a locked closet with baseball bats.
Absolutely
No, it's figurative. You need tough guys that are fighters at receivers.
But we do want to say, for the second week in a row, audio discretion advised.
I like it. Nicely done.
Trevor, my question now is, whoever the wide receivers are next year, who is the quarterback that will be throwing them the ball? Because this is setting up to be the compelling storyline in the offseason for BYU, and that is who's the quarterback. Tanner Mangum's trying to come back from a significant Achilles injury. Bo Hodge was ruled out for the season. Here comes Joe Critchlow. Where does Cody Wilstead fit into this? And then not to mention guys that BYU will get back from mission or maybe bring in from the JC ranks. Who's the quarterback going into spring ball and next season?
I'd love to tell you that I think there's a front runner, but I don't think there is, and I don't think there should be. I think that it should be wide open. I think every position should be wide open to competition. And from the lowest walk-on to the most highly regarded recruit, I think that they should fight for every position because they need that fighter's mentality. By the way, that's another problem when you have so many injuries, that you lose the ability to have competition in practice. You take Alabama. Let's just use them as our example. This is the perfect program. if you don't do your best in practice, there's another 4 or 5 star right behind you that's just an inch away from taking your job. And that competition makes everybody better on the practice field, which makes it work on game day. For BYU, it's not that they don't try hard in practice, it's that in a lot of positions they don't have that extra impetus of a qualified backup pushing the starter. And when you have injuries, it makes it all the worse, and you don't get that dynamic. So I want to see that dynamic. But to do that, they need to make sure they're healthy and they keep adding talent. From a standpoint of quarterback, I don't think there's a front runner. But if I am a guy in competition for that position, what I do is 2 things before spring practice starts. The first thing is I spend as much time in the film room with Ty Detmer, with offensive coaches, studying defense, learn defense, because this offense requires that the quarterback not know just where his receivers are going, but what defenses are doing, because that will dictate which guy he throws to. The second thing, and study your own defense, by the way, because you'll be facing your own defense in spring ball. The second thing is I'd go out there with receivers, and I'd throw routes. And what you have is, take Peyton Manning, I think, is a great example of this. When he was playing for the Colts especially, he would go out in the offseason with his receivers, and they'd spend a couple hours running one route over and over again, dozens of times, one route. So they can get the body language down, the positioning. If it's 12-yard out, don't run 11 yards and don't run 13 yards. And if you're supposed to make that break and come back 2 yards toward the line of scrimmage when you make the break, then come back 2 yards towards the line of scrimmage. Don't drift in either direction. I would run thousands of pass routes before spring ball if I'm one of those quarterbacks trying to vie for that job. And by the way, the receivers, same way. So, they have an opportunity now to kind of get their legs underneath them, get their mind underneath them after this miserable season. Take a few weeks off and kind of clear your head. But I tell you, the time period before spring ball may be the most critical time period for BYU's quarterbacks and receivers of any time period this offseason.
Trevor Matich of ESPN bringing it on a reality check Monday. We appreciate the straight shooting answers, Trevor.
All right, thanks, guys.